when the first flu broke out in Mexico, this new particular flu, and I put on YouTube a 10-minute special report on the Mexican flu. Tonight I'm going to share with you what the British government has done, stockpiling Baxter's vaccinations, and I won't talk too much about Novavax tonight. What we're dealing with is an Anglo-American genocidal operation. The vaccine pipeline runs from Britain to the U.S., as does control over intelligence agencies through naval research, naval intelligence, MI6 to CIA, Mossad on down. This is a summary of oral evidence from Dr. John Wood and James Robertson from the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control, the NIBSC, here in the UK. These folks are your top officials, not only in the UK, but the top officials for influenza, directing the World Health Organization's response and vaccination agenda for the WHO, the World Health Organization. In essence, these two men have the most powerful positions of any person on this planet in directing the response, the quote, biodefense response for influenza. This is a summary that was presented in writing based on virtually a backroom deal and discussion by World Health Organization officials and the think tanks that were involved in the biodefense strategies for the global pandemic of H5N1, the avian, and H1N1 swine flu and Spanish flu strains. Dr. Robertson, from this evidence, you can absolutely be certain, number one, controls the standardization of influenza vaccines based on these strains of flu viruses produced on behalf of the World Health Organization. These two guys are at the forefront, and Robertson, I believe, based on what I've been reading of him, as the foremost, involved in the serological testing of vaccine trials for these agents internationally, prepare these strains of influenza viruses for these trials, select all strains of viruses used in flu vaccine research and development on behalf of the EU, the Economic European Union, prepare and distribute selected influenza viruses on behalf of all the vaccine manufacturers. So in other words, if you've got a vaccine corporation, a maker of vaccinations anywhere in the world, this is the guy, particularly Robertson, who selects what viruses you're going to be working with to produce that vaccine. Prepares and distributes then also selected influenza viruses on behalf of these vaccine makers. Then promotes, I mean, this is the guy who's out in the front over every single meeting, promoting the governmental stockpiling of the latest influenza vaccines, providing economic incentives, he does, for private companies to invest in vaccine research and development. He basically proclaims poverty and how it is sad that we don't give enough money to governments for vaccine research and development. He prefers American corporate collaborations with H5N1, H1N1, and H9N2 research, allegedly due to the availability of U.S. taxpayer money to fund this research and development and stockpiling of vaccines. They introduce laboratory flu viruses. Unassumingly, they don't call them viruses anymore. They call them, quote, mock-up files, or similars. Similar in that they're laboratory recombinants, genetically modified, mutated, hybridized, new laboratory creations that they don't even want to alert or alarm the public, so they have new names, new terminology for them. So mock-up files is the new term for new man-made laboratory viruses used for vaccine research and development. They entice corporations by sharing these mock-up files to companies to invest, and then they generate new vaccine viruses, these mock-up files or biosimilars, using reverse genetics that Dr. Robertson apparently has a patent on, and that he has the opportunity to have this lucrative intellectual property make him money. not essentially right now until the stockpiling and the order is placed. That's when the payoff comes to Dr. Robertson. Beyond having the biotechnology patents and that capability of earning vast wealth from humanity's suffering and intoxication, he holds material transfer agreements that also provide compensations following their delivery of reverse-engineered viruses to vaccine companies when related vaccine are ordered, stockpiled, or commercialized. Now, this is what I need to share with you. That was just interesting facts that I shared. They're pretty indicting insofar as conflicts of interest. I'm sure most people who still have a pea brain operating still they can realize there's a gross conflict of interest in having the world depend on people who hold this kind of power and financial incentive. But this is the issue that I'm concerned about as a researcher in this field. This is a quote from this oral summary in a World Health Organization conference discussing what will be done with regard to influenza. They were asked, Drs. Wood and Robertson were asked their opinion regarding the, quote, priming of human populations. Now, this is a quote, ladies and gentlemen. This is a quote from that paper. Quote, Drs. Wood and Robertson were asked their opinion regarding the priming of human populations for pandemic flu using live viral vaccines and if they consider it to be a good idea. End quote. This question was asked in 2006, just 3 years ago. At the time, they were dealing with another Tyson Corporation-related outbreak of the avian flu. If you've read the book Healing Codes for the Biological Apocalypse several years ago, I produced that book, and I showed you the ties, intimate ties, and the first time H1N1 was even talked about in the mainstream media, it was associated with the Tyson corporations vying for a global monopoly over the poultry industry. They apparently loosed these viruses in chickens in Asia. They targeted family farmers and smaller corporations to literally put those folks out of business. And that's the way that industrial espionage, games, and sabotage, and literally serial slayings and mass murder to effect economic benefits for large multinational corporations is played today. The concept that human populations would be primed, you've got to ask one simple question. What would be required in order to convince the public, the entire human population of the planet, to submit to such a priming? I can tell you as a behavioral science expert, Harvard trained in behavioral science, media health education, health promotion, persuasion technologies, research and development, which is why I can watch mainstream media, headline news, and I see it for the cues, the subtle cues, the triggering, all of the little neuro-linguistic programming, messaging, and all of this incredible population manipulation through what is technically called psychological operations, psychological warfare, or short, it's called PSYOPs. And I can tell you that there's no way in hell that they would ever be able to convince the global public to submit to a priming of these mock-up files or biosimilars laboratory viruses. So you have got to understand that if they were going to loose these beasts, they would have to do it via a psychological operation such as what you're witnessing, which is standard protocol. Psychological operation is part of the United States War College's recommendations following what was called the revolution in military affairs and the conducting of, quote, non-lethal warfare. Now, you follow the chemical intoxication with the biological exposures, and now you have something that is foolproof in terms of genocide. You'll never be able to pin it down to one agent, therefore you've got no liability. Total freedom, no potential liability whatsoever to all of the vaccine industrialists and all of the drug industrialists. There's no liability now whatsoever. There is a complete legislative freedom to conduct genocide.